Thank you so much, Alex, for the introduction and your kind words. I'm very happy that we are having this conversation today. If the title of the panel is a question, does cinema need to reinvent itself? The answer is very short from my point of view. Yes, it does need to reinvent itself. And why that is the case and how that can happen, we are going to discuss in the course of the next hour. There are four great minds having this conversation, and I think what you four do to a big extent of your time is thinking about the cinema going experience and audiences and engagement strategies, and I'm very happy to hear more about all of this. I would like to introduce the speakers very briefly and then hand over to them to hear more about what they do and what their work is and what they love about cinema. So let's start with Anthony Andrews. He's the co-founder and creative director of We Are Parable in London. Hello, Anthony.
Hello, Erwin. Hello, panel. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Anthony Andrews. I'm the co-founder and creative director of a company called We Are Parable, and we are an award-winning film exhibition company based in London, running since 2013. And essentially what we do is create opportunities for audiences all around the UK to experience and respond to Black cinema in culturally relevant, memorable and unique ways. And the way we do that is by creating experiences within cinemas or cinematic venues that replicate the environment of a film. And the best example that I have of that is what we did for a film, Black Panther, in 2018, where we took over the BFI South Bank in central London and created an Afro-futuristic kingdom with cosplayers, African arts and crafts makers, designers, creating this immersive environment that enhanced people's experience of the film. So we believe in experience over everything, and we work with a number of organizations to create those memorable experiences for our audiences.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And while you were talking, Johanna was smiling, so I assume what you said resonated with her. So let's move on to Johanna. Hello. We don't hear you, Johanna. Your mic is off.
This many months in and still we're doing this. No, I was laughing because I was kicking myself for missing that Black Panther event. I'm a massive Marvel fan, so that would have been a big deal for me. Yeah, but there is also another reason. I'm a media analyst working out of Sweden. I write something every year called the Nostradamus report, which is a sort of a near future state of the industry report of what's going on, film and TV, scripted focused, but with some broader outlooks, and also looking at macro trends, which I may have reason to return to today. You can find Nostradamus reports for free downloads on the Göteborg Film Festival website, or if you Google for Nordic Film Market and Nostradamus, or my name and Nostradamus, you can find them right there. In addition to that, I'm involved in public funding. I'm on the board of the Swedish Film Institute. I listen to a lot of pitches for a small regional fund in West Sweden. So I'm also sort of working a little bit with filmmakers in that way. And I also have a whole other company that does a completely unrelated thing, except that on this particular panel, it's not unrelated, because I have a participation design agency that makes experience design. So we create events that move people in physical spaces, very typically in working with cultural institutions and those kinds of things. And actually, we've done a little tiny bit of cinema work as well, but a lot of the principles are the same. And I feel also that exhibition is not always great at experiences, to put it diplomatically. Yeah.
That was very diplomatically said.
Yeah. Well, present company excluded, clearly. Yeah.
Of course, yes. Thank you. Moving on to Ben Johnson, who is with us from Copenhagen today. Hello, Ben. You are the CEO of Gruvi.
Yes, believe it or not, I made it. No, so running Gruvi for about 10 years now. We originally started out as a technology company trying to build a recommendations engine. And along the way, we suddenly realized that there was a lot more help that we could give to studios. So we've been working across film promotion for the last 8 years since then. We're a full stack agency that tries to correlate the marketing with the actual ticket sales as well. And since the pandemic, we've been working more and more with video on demand globally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to dive deeper into what that all means practically for us, since we are also part of the audience, all of us, right? Okay, thank you. Moving on to Tim League, founder and executive chairman of the Alamo Drafthouse. Tim, hello, welcome.
Thank you. So I got into this industry in '97 with the opening of the first theater, and over the last 20 some odd years, we now have 41 locations in the United States. It's small theater chain, about 320 screens. We're also a cinema dining concept, so we have full service restaurant. We generally have bars associated with the theaters as well. And in addition to the cinemas, we've started what's now the largest genre film festival in the United States, Fantastic Fest. I'm a co-founder in the distribution company Neon, and we also have a product side with it started with the boutique movie posters called Mondo, but now we're into vinyl soundtracks and toys and games, but all centering around movies that we love. And we play commercial films, but we also play a lot of alternative content, try to produce experiences of our own, and then have a relatively decent footprint in repertory and foreign language films, documentaries as well.
Mm-hmm. And since you, thank you so much. And since you run physical venues, I assume your organization has been hit strongly by the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes, we're trending above the industry a bit, but the industry's in terrible shape, right? So we have, of the 41 theaters, we have about 10 open. We just had to close an additional one in the Colorado market because of state mandated closures because of the spikes there. So, we're generally seeing around maybe 18 to 20% of year-over-year revenue right now, and a large percentage of that is from our private cinema offering. Upwards of probably 50% of our revenue is based on people renting individual theaters privately for their bubble or family or group.
Okay, we are going to talk about the impact of the pandemic in more detail. I'd like to come back to Anthony, which is, even though on different ends of the range, in the same type of business as you, Tim, actually offering special experiences to audiences. Anthony, can you tell us more precisely what you do, and what is the success recipe of your offering?
I think it really comes from a place of understanding the audience. And, as I mentioned before, one thing that we're really keen on doing is not just providing an experience, but providing a culturally relevant experience. We primarily within Black cinema. So that means directors behind the camera, Black talent in front of the camera. And we attract primarily a Black audience, or, audiences who are, interested in Black cinema. And I think what we try and do is connect the dots. So we say, we're not just going to show you a film about Black lives, or about a Black director moving in a particular area. We're going to try and create something that gives you a little bit more, and that can be something as simple as having a Q&A with cultural commentators who can talk widely about the context in which a film has been made. So if you think of say, a Spike Lee film like Black Klansman, we'd work with someone who perhaps wrote a book on the Black Panthers in the UK to really bring it into a localized audience. Or we could do something a bit more bigger scale, like, you know, using Spike Lee as an example. We, you know, in 2017, we had a screening of his film Mo Better Blues from the 90s, and we had a saxophonist play music in the in an Art Deco cinema that really enhanced the screening of the film. So it's really about, you know, creating these experiences that make sense to our audience. And I think that's where we always start from. We like to see ourselves as being the audience, and we always say we never do events that we wouldn't be a part of. So I think it's just by trying to understand how an audience might feel when we create a particular event. I think that's the success of what we've done. And I think the way that we put our experiences together and the feedback that we get, it does seem well.
Okay, thank you so much. When you introduced yourself at the beginning, you said you were running a film exhibition company, and I like very much that there is this twist. You're not an exhibitor, obviously not, because you don't run this like continuous operation in a fixed venue, but you're like a traveling event, if I understand it right, and it's an exhibition company that puts experience over everything. Before I take this term and hand it over to Johanna, I would just like to mention to the audience that we have polls coming up during the conversation. One is on the lower side of your screen, and the question is: do you believe cinemas will bounce back when they reopen? And we are interested in your answer to this question. Please answer in the chat function of your screen with hashtag A if you think yes, hashtag B if you disagree, and hashtag C if you think it's maybe. So Johanna, let's look a little more closely at this at the experience factor. Cinemas with their scalable and repetitive approach to showing cinemas, in my opinion, have neglected the experience aspect. You have looked at this very closely over a long time. Can you please share your thoughts on this with us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I go to cinemas a lot, and as an experience designer, it's very difficult to do experiences when they are poorly designed. And I think that when it comes to cinemas, there's been a massive improvements in just the last five to maybe 7 years. But even in the most basic ways, the most fundamental experience design questions: how does it feel to be here? Do I feel welcome? Do I understand what I'm allowed to do? Do I feel seen and validated? And a lot of those, especially the sort of commercial, sort of blockbuster cinemas, aren't great. I'm allowed to come in there and buy things, but I may have nowhere to sit down to actually consume them. There aren't spaces for me to participate in the reflection around the work. So if I have a transformative experience, I'm going to take my experience out of the venue and process it somewhere else, which is an incredible waste of just audience engagement for the organizations. But in the art house space, and of course places like the Alamo Drafthouse, there's so much, we're doing so much better there already. But I mean, if I could wish just for one thing, it would be perhaps after I finish seeing a film, which may be life-changing or super entertaining, maybe don't kick me out a back door into an alley next to a dumpster that smells of urine. Like, there has to be a nicer way to exit me from this experience that still feels like I'm, locking down those memories into something positive. So those are sort of very practical things. But on a much more sort of high level, I think it's interesting that our headline today is "Does cinema need to reinvent itself?" Because to me, cinema and cinemas are not synonymous. And now I happen to think that the answer to both of those questions is yes. Exhibition needs to reinvent itself and has been changing in a way that the exhibition sector isn't always very self-aware about, but also cinemas need to change. And fundamentally, a cinema as the art form needs also to change. And fundamentally at the core is the same problem, that the audience is not in focus. We have been a very high status industry for very long, and exhibition has had a enormous power in this industry, and we've been very comfortable dictating to the audience what their experience should be. There's still this attitude that the audience should be grateful to get to see my movie or to get to see a movie in this cinema, and that is just not that doesn't fly with the audience, not for decades now.
As the representative of the German Film Producers Association, I took part in a conversation at the Cultural Minister last year, prior to the cinematic law being renewed for the next 5 years, and there was a very large meeting room with probably representatives of 15 or so professional associations, producers, distributors, everyone. The one group that was not represented and never takes part in these conversations is the audience, obviously, right? So we're talking about a 450 million budget in euros in Germany, public subsidy alone, from different sources. It goes into cinematic production, and the one group that never has a say in this whole conversation is the audience. So yes, I agree with you that the audience has been neglected. But coming back to one aspect, you mentioned the difference between blockbuster or like mainstream cinemas and art house cinemas. Why do you think that art house has gotten better in the last couple of years, and not so much mainstream exhibitions venues?
Very simply because art house, well, I mean, the business propositions also are very different. If we have the blockbuster business model where somebody makes a big promise to me and I pay quite a lot of money to get value for that money. I want a blockbuster film to deliver exactly what I wanted. I don't want to know the details, but I'm going to get exactly what I wanted. I know what a Bond movie is. I know what I want the Marvel movie to be. And then I get that or I don't. When I go to see another type of film, I go to be challenged or to participate in a niche culture or to do something that has to do with my identity in some deep way, or to be surprised or to have a cultural experience where I can feel a little bit special for seeing something that not everyone has seen. Of course, that's also marketing. Like, of course, that I have been sort of sold that promise just as much in that art house space as I have in the blockbuster space. But it feels very different, and the proposition is very different. And I won't be upset in the same way if I experience something that I didn't expect. In fact, the very opposite. I'll be very happy about that. But I also think that art houses and local cinemas, which are almost but not quite the same, they need to know their audience. If they were to survive in the sort of blockbuster explosion we've seen in the last decade, and everything that's happened with the digitalization and how the sort of long tail curve has changed its shape so that the top 10 films take a higher cut of the total of tickets sold, you have to program for your actual audience. And if you know how to do that, which many art houses do, then you'll do very well. Then you'll overperform.
Staying with the operations of exhibitors for a moment, Tim, is that what you're doing rocket science or just very good craft?
Well, I think I'll just I'll continue on that idea of the differentiation between art house and commercial. We're somewhere in between. We're not either one, but we have components of both. But we are definitely independent, and I think one of the issues with commercial large theater chains is there has to be a focus for your business, and their focus has been basically to commoditize the business, right, and to focus on the bottom line. And there was also this guarantee of a 90-day window, which is exclusivity, which means, okay, we've got the guaranteed product. That's not going to change. So we might as well just refine our cost structure so we can maximize profits. And so that's sort of a myopic view that doesn't take into account what's happening now and the changes. And I think that the art house theaters, and my sensibilities lean towards art house, even though we play both, is to have community-based conversations, have real engagement and with your guests and also understand the points of differentiation. Most of what we offer as an exhibitor came from a point of, I love movies. This is my wife and I talking 20 years ago. I love movies, but I kind of hate cinemas. So what do we hate? And how are we going to make it better? We've always been focused on guest experience as a point of differentiation, because it's meaningful for us to build those communities, and it's also a way to be competitive against the. And I think what we're seeing now is a reality that the bigger change are going to have to follow. They're going to have to learn from the independents and from the art house theaters about the importance of community and the importance of creating events and special memories by going to the cinema, making it really special every time you go to the cinema. I think the pressure's on our shoulders to justify our position, to recoup the investments that that producers and filmmakers put into a film. It's no longer guaranteed because of the accelerated pace of what's been going on.
My question was less ironic than it might seem to be. Positioning yourself between rocket science and good craft. And the reason I was asking this is that there is an indication of this in the title of this panel. The cinema the cinema need to reinvent itself, and reinvention sounds like a disruptive change. But what I and I haven't been to one of your cinemas, but what I can read what you guys do is like you do certain things very, very well and very passionately, and being a good host, a welcoming, running a welcoming house, having like an open door doesn't seem to be rocket science. Why is it so difficult for most of your peer operators in this business? So it this leads me to the assumption that it is more than just good craft, and.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, right? But I think it does have to do with what I said earlier was if you're focusing on maximizing your profitability, you're going to find mechanisms to reduce the size of your staff, right? You're going to try to push out one message to a global audience that doesn't have any personality or doesn't have any resonance with a local audience. And you lower your operations costs so low that it really is just come in. You have no local engagement with your local cinema. You don't have a relationship with a local Regal cinema or AMC cinema staff, and we try to offer that. With community, we hire community liaisons and local creative managers and hosts for shows to. Treat human beings like human beings instead of widgets. But there is some rocket science too. Like we're very technology forward, and I think some of the best innovations that we're trying to work on are reduction of friction through the experience. Like how can technology make a cleaner, better experience? A COVID project for us is ordering in advance, right? We built a subscription service in the wake of the Movie Pass from a couple of years ago. So these things, I think are important and are rocket science. But the more important is having a sense of community and having the theater be a community gathering point for your local neighborhood.
How much of this is part of your work, Ben? Addressing communities, and if it's not, what else is most important in what you do?
It's.
I think a lot of the question went to Ben. Sorry, Tim.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Tim, go
No. Done talking.
So I think one of the big things that sort of came out of COVID is the interest in independent film and more interesting film. I think as everyone sort of burnt through their Netflix accounts and then jumped onto HBO and burnt through their HBO series that they wanted to watch, one of the things I noticed, and certainly from the feedback we've had from local distributors here in Scandinavia, was that it was much easier to get people's attention for these indie films. So I think as we have collectively calmed down from the rat race and, been forced into lockdown, one of the good things is, people have been reviewing their sleep patterns, their travel patterns, their business life patterns, everything like that. I think is going to change in the way that we approach living in cities, for instance. There's a couple of consultancy firms that we're friendly with that we've heard that they've given up on their London premises and moved out to Cambridge in the UK, for instance, was one eye-opener. If we look at the cinema experience, I think things are going to be fine in terms of how people get back. We're going to have a reversal on, going out to work and then going from work straight to the pub and then down to the cinema, as I saw in London on the times I was over there. We're probably going to see the cinema experience perhaps being treated a little bit more as a special night out, because essentially we're all going to be working from home a lot more now. One of the big realizations is that you can have your workforce work from home and they'll continue to do the job. In fact, they'll probably work harder for you because they're not having to commute for quite such a long period of the day. And in those kinds of circumstances, what we've also noticed is that the cinemas that are offering something different to the standard fare also seem to be doing better. So Everyman Group, which is a cinema chain that really focused on the high end of cinema going in the UK, they sold 10% of the tickets of Tenet, and they're a fraction of the size of Odeon and View and Cineworld. And I found that very interesting. That for me indicated that we're having maybe what's called the lipstick moment. When societies go through tough times, they start to spend more on small indulgences. So, animation films have done particularly well throughout this period, and that's been a solid bet from anything that's being released. Because people want to go and take their family out to something where they're guaranteed a nice experience, and they don't mind paying a bit more for seeing it, say, at an Everyman theatre where the ticket price is 15-20% higher because of the luxury seating and the the smaller venues and stuff like that. So I do think cinema will come out, but well at the end of this period. What will change will be two things. I think it'll be much more focused on this idea of the experience. I think hopefully cinemas will wake up to the idea that they're competing with the opportunity for an event or a night out, and that's really the market they should be focusing on. The other thing that we've been focusing on, trying to get the cinemas to cross the line on, is this idea of treating their foyer as a digital experience as well, and going out and taking the foyer into the web. So we've all been forced now, all cinemas are now forced to sell their tickets online throughout Europe, and yet we're still looking at unresponsive pages on mobile operating systems, 7 or 8 clicks to purchase a ticket, text screens and entry fields too small to enter the details. And it doesn't matter if we then manage to drive a user into that ticketing experience for, say, half a euro or 70 cents. If they're not going to convert at the far end, that's part of the terrible experience of or the terrible user journey that quite a lot of cinemas have. So we've released a series of audits over the years to try and benchmark what a good theatrical experience looks like from an online perspective, how the website is configured, how quickly it runs, how responsive it is to mobile, how well it ranks within Google. And surprisingly enough, it's not European cinemas that are doing well. It's Eastern European cinemas that are really just, kicking the doors off the whole online experience. So Multiplex in Kiev, which we gave, a review of recently on our blog, they have a dedicated ad operations team. They have an email service that gives you qualified recommendations based on your preferences for movies from past history. They have a one-click to buy approach to online ticketing, and they're very effective at moving the whole online experience or the foyer experience where you're used to upselling users into the digital realm. And I think this is the area that is part of the experience. As we become, more digitally savvy, we're going to become more fickle about the experiences that we wander into.
Could I follow up on that, Erwin?
Please, yes.
Because I have two sort of yes and, because I think everything you're saying about the foyer, the digital foyer, so to speak, is super interesting. But I'd like to add to that one consequence is, of course, that we need to take a look at that of the physical space that can now perhaps be redistributed or optimized in different ways, and to really think about that physical this physical experience of the cinema being somewhere lovely to be. Instead of somewhere stressful to wait until the sort of actual experience of the film itself begins. And I'm, as I said before, like a big believer that the whole experience from the first online contact, that's when the experience starts. It's not when the ads have ended in the screening room itself. But I also want to add to that there's an aspect here that I am alarmed that we're not talking so much about in the industry, and it is that has to do with the fact that most of us, if we work with these things, regardless of our backgrounds, today we have middle class lifestyles, and that means that yes, for us this pandemic has largely been like a lovely break to sort of reevaluate what's going on. And for so many people in the world, in all of our countries, that is not the case. And the middle classes are the cultural audience. That's just the statistical fact. A lot of the bulk of sort of carrying the culture sector, both the people who work there and a lot of the consumption and the big money invested in culture comes from the sort of, broadly speaking, the middle classes. And the middle classes will shrink. And I don't know how much, because we're sort of at the edges. We haven't seen this before. And normally when we're talking about growth, we're saying, oh, but the gross natural product will grow by this and this many percent or not. But now we're talking about like actual percentage reductions in the size, reductions in gross national products for years going forward, possibly. And I haven't read any very convincing models of what the consequences of this will be, because we haven't experienced this in the world. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's going to be surprising, expensive, terrifying effects that will have financial consequences for people going years forward. And in countries that don't have a big public support system, that don't have a welfare state of any kind, even perhaps in the United States, if they don't get their ducks in order, I'm afraid a lot of people are going to slip into actual poverty. And then we have all the people, all the audience groups who have been underserved to begin with, who have been hit hardest by Corona, or have been hit hardest by the financial consequences. There is a risk that at the exact moment when a bigger section of the world population is slipping out of the middle classes, we are actually transforming cinemas into these lovely upmarket experiences with sort of these lovely hanging out spaces where a lot of the consumers and a lot of the citizens will in fact not feel welcome, or in fact not be welcome, even if they could afford it. And that is something where a lot of thought has to go into this, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I wonder if I could just jump in at this.
Please, Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I totally agree with Johanna. I think one of the things that I'm really keen that does at this point, at this point in time, is really think about, I guess, trying to go after that middle class audience. You mentioned that the middle class audience is shrinking, but I want cinema to realize that and not try and put all of their their marketing spend on trying to get this middle class audience who have a disposable income, when there are different audiences who actually statistically are some of the most frequent visitors to cinema. You mentioned underserved audiences. In the UK, black audiences are, I think, the second most frequent visitors of cinema. And I think if there's so much focus on trying to get, I guess, people who are in the middle class, who are spending lots of money at the cinema at an expense of not trying to engage with black audiences, then I do fear for exactly the kind of slate that you'll start to see, the programming that you'll start to see in cinema. So I think that's why it's important that organisations like myself, like other organisations that are operating in the same space and attracting black audiences, are able to come into these spaces and try to attract these audiences, because that's one of the biggest fear fears is that by trying to get bums on seats, we forget about developing underserved audiences. So I think that's something that cinema really needs to do if it wants to reinvent itself.
I'm so relieved that a lot of the sort of big, difficult were intra-industry debates about diversity happened, 3 to 5 years ago, rather than, in the next 3 years, because we might not have gotten around to that in the midst of a global financial crisis. And because now the audiences have proven, thankfully, we had time to prove that the industry has been wrong in our calculations. And I think that connects to this idea of when I say cinema also needs to reinvent itself. I don't know how old y'all are, but I was a teenager in the 1990s, and I'm here today because of Quentin Tarantino, because of Wayne Wang, because of Spike Lee, because of Kevin Smith even, a lot of filmmakers who blew my mind, and Tom Tykwer, of course, Kieślowski, Kaurismäki as well, the European filmmakers, because cinema was necessary. It was something that we breathed because it was powerful and wonderful. And I think that we kind of missed the generation, or that sort of artistic, we expect an artistic revolution in cinema every 20 years, and we didn't get one 10, 15 years ago when one was due. And I think probably it's because a lot of the creative talent, in particular women and minority creators who found it very difficult to break into feature in the midst of that financial crisis, instead ending up in television with great payoffs and great commitment from the audience. And also blockbuster films got better. Like a lot of people got picked straight out of Sundance to make, a billion grossing film in the end. And so also blockbusters got better. So for very young audiences, it makes sense to be incredibly invested in Marvel movies because they're quite good, and a lot of other, if you compare to the blockbusters I was watching in the 80s and 90s, the quality is also cinematically, not just special effects, is very different. So we also have a relevance problem. And I think that we have to be very real about that. And we can only answer the relevance problem by the industry standing closer to the audience and listening more and dictating less.
Bringing up the topic of relevance is interesting. My secret assumption is that the cultural relevance has been overshadowed or pushed aside by the technological relevance. Basically, what changes societies and what changes the world at the moment is technology and no longer culture. You can have you can create a scandal by publishing a tweet, but you can hardly cause a scandal anymore by publishing a book or releasing a film. And that is I think that tells a lot about where we stand in the world and why a lot of, as you were mentioning, Johanna, we missed a generation because they didn't have this collective moment of epiphany when watching certain films. But I would like to come back to a development Ben was pointing out. Cinema is actually moving into this upscale segment. What does that mean for the large amount of venues nationwide, continent-wide, worldwide? Not all cinemas actually have the financial means to upscale their operations. They might not all have the fantasy to design the strategies. They might not all have the right venues. So what will happen to those that do not have these various resources? Will they disappear, or will they remain what they are at the moment and the way they are at the moment, serving a different audience, perhaps with different types of films?
I think I think a lot goes down to how innovative the cinema managers can be. At the end of the day, quite a lot of cinema locations or cinema real estates in good centralized locations around major cities. So a good example is Picture House in Boston, which is a lovely cinema location there. But one of the things I found quite charming when I was staying at a friend's house last year was that on Saturday and Sunday mornings they were making full use of the space for children, screening films and and really making, it almost like a community center for that weekend. Because living in London, it's a tough city to live in if you've got kids, if you're in, some areas of town, it's a real hassle to trek across and get to a decent park area with the children. So I when I was in there, just at the coffee shop, it was quite interesting watching the queues and queues of people that were coming in, all from the local neighborhood to partake in the space. I think one of the key challenges that cinemas have had across the board is how do you fill out the spaces, for the dead period of the day. And I do think this idea of, having something that's based around, conferences and exhibitions, as I've been watching Odeon do, is quite interesting. If we are going to have a more remote workforce and less office space available within the cities, and, let's face it, if that goes that way, then those office spaces, they'll become residential households at some point. Then there'll be more requirement for on the spot and flexible meeting areas as well. So I just think that the main thing is to keep your eyes open and try and look for opportunities in the market as a cinema manager throughout Europe. It's not, yes, it's going to be tough and not all things will work out for you, but one thing that certainly won't work out is continuing the model that was there before the pandemic, on limited resources and expecting it to get back to normal quickly. And the Facebook conference I attended yesterday, they were measuring the index of the key things that retail were having to take into consideration now, and safety went up from number 6 to number 2. So the operational costs for cinemas are going to go up with these other considerations. So I have no fast answer. I just think it's really the time for the entrepreneurs to come out of the woodwork now and start reinventing the space and reinventing the experience.
Inventing and reinventing leads me to you, Tim. How much of what you guys do at Alamo Drafthouse actually is designed, within your team, invented or reinvented within your team, and how much actually you go and borrow or steal from competitors or other business areas like retail or other cultural endeavors.
Sorry,
we can't hear you, Tim.
Yeah. I muted myself. My daughter was on the trampoline. I think that they're fused, right? Even throughout this conversation, I've made a couple of notes of things I want to dig into deeper. So I think always having your receptors open for good ideas to either steal, as you say, or use as a jumping point for things that might make our experiences better. I think. I come from an entrepreneurial mindset, right? I didn't define it as such in my early career, but I certainly am always looking for means to improve our guest experience. So I don't think there's not a vacuum lab of Alamo Drafthouse people coming up with ideas, but we're all out there looking and refining. There's been, tremendous innovation. I think out of sheer panic comes great innovation and great thought about how we can improve this space and how we can, bridge between video on demand and the theatrical space. How we can further differentiate ourselves. I think the coming out of this, the pressure is going to be on to say, is it worth my investment in time and money and safety to leave the home and have an experience, even after a vaccine, even after a relative return to normalcy? I think that's going to be the question we have to resolve. And the key is going to be experience based to me, and those little details of the lobby, of the technical presentation, of the frictionless experience. We want people to remember it and crave more after that. So.
If I could just jump in.
Yes, of course.
I think it's about making sure that the audience are, as I mentioned before, I sound like a bit of a broken record, but I think it is about the audience, and it's asking yourself why. So if we think that, you know, with a pandemic, you know, even with the vaccine, even with social distancing, all of these safeguarding principles being put in place, if we're asking why our audience should turn to our space, you know, what is our reason for showing up? What is our reason for existing? I think if cinemas can ask themselves that question, then I think they start to get a lot closer to getting audiences to come back. And I think it does start with putting yourself in the shoes of your audience. Why should your audience come and spend time with you? What value